Good morning, everyone. We're diving deeper into Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil today, zeroing in on Aphorism 8 from that explosive first chapter, Prejudices of Philosophers. Now, this isn't a long aphorism, but let me tell you, it's dense. Incredibly so. It's a potent generalization, isn't it, of all those critiques Nietzsche has been lobbing in the aphorisms leading up to this. Think about it. If aphorisms 1 through 7 were him chipping away at specific philosophical prejudices, the will to truth itself, perhaps, or that tricky faith in opposite values, then Aphorism 8? Well, Aphorism 8 aims to unmask what Nietzsche considers the common, deeply subjective root of all such grand philosophical systems. It goes right for the throat of philosophy's perceived objectivity. And what does it posit instead? An unacknowledged, often non-rational foundation. The philosopher's very own conviction. Remember our earlier talks about the will to truth. Nietzsche's suggesting here that even this will, this driving force, might just be a performance staged upon something more fundamental, a personal conviction. He's really broadening those earlier attacks. And we also looked at the faith in opposite values, right? Another common philosophical crutch. So now, Nietzsche challenges us to consider the conviction, that bedrock belief, that could possibly lead a philosopher to embrace such a faith. And this, naturally, brings up some pretty crucial questions. Questions that might have been brewing from our last discussions. If the will to truth is itself a prejudice, then what truly motivates philosophers? Are all philosophical starting points, when you get right down to it, ultimately arbitrary, non-rational, even? And here's a big one, maybe the most pressing. How can philosophy even proceed if its very foundations are so suspect? Seriously, how does Nietzsche's own sweeping claim here sidestep the very accusation he's leveling against everyone else? We'll definitely touch on that bit of methodological self-awareness. Today, get ready. We're going to see Nietzsche deploy his trademark genealogical inquiry, that deep dig into the origins of philosophical claims. And alongside it, a razor-sharp hermeneutics of suspicion, constantly questioning the often flattering self-portraits philosophers paint. We'll also delve into his masterful use of potent metaphor, those resonant classical allusions, and, fascinatingly, how the very form of his writing dances with its content. Nietzsche kicks things off with an absolutely sweeping assertion. Listen to this.
In every philosophy, there is a point where the philosopher's conviction steps onto the stage.
Let's stop right there for a moment. In every philosophy, he claims, every single one. That's a universal statement. Classic Nietzsche. Bold, aphoristic, hitting you with a force, but ironically, feels like its own kind of meta-conviction. And what is it that steps onto the stage? The philosopher's conviction, his Überzeugung. Now, this word, Überzeugung, it's crucial. Nietzsche even wraps it in quotation marks, doesn't he? That's a signal. A term under intense scrutiny. Maybe one he's twisting for his own purposes. In German, Überzeugung isn't just a simple belief. Oh no. It carries this weight of being utterly convinced, maybe even overcome by a belief. It's a persuasion that's often deeper, less consciously chosen than, say, Glaube, which is more like faith or belief. It implies being utterly mastered by an idea. Think about that. And that theatrical metaphor steps onto the stage, off the Bühnetritt. It's so evocative, isn't it? The Bühne, the stage. It's not just a place for performance, for potential illusion. It's also a public forum, a place of high visibility, where something absolutely decisive makes its appearance. The conviction isn't just lurking in the background. It manifests. It takes center stage, becoming the core drama of the entire philosophical system. So, what does this imply? A moment of shocking revelation, where the true basis of the philosophy is, perhaps unintentionally, laid bare for all to see. Or is it a performance, a deliberate, even if unacknowledged, presentation of a foundational stance? This very staging of truth, well, it complicates any claim to have arrived at some final, unmediated understanding. It even suggests Nietzsche's own presentation is, itself, a meticulously constructed scene. This assertion directly challenges the entire rationalist project, a project epitomized by figures like Descartes, desperately seeking an indubitable cogito, or Kant, laboring to ground metaphysics in transcendental idealism. Nietzsche's saying that even these monumental, painstakingly constructed efforts are, at some crucial point, preceded by an unproven commitment. This powerful Überzeugung. This is where we can really see Nietzsche putting two of his key philosophical methods to work, and it gives us a fantastic insight into how he builds his critiques. First, genealogy. He's not just asking, is this philosophical system logically sound? No, he's digging deeper, asking, where does this system, or even more fundamentally, the drive to create this system, where does it come from? He's excavating origins, and often finding them in non-rational soil, psychological, physiological, or, as we see here, in a deeply personal conviction. Genealogy is like being an archaeologist of ideas, isn't it? It digs down to find out where an idea really originated, not just its neat logical justification. Of course, and this is a quick methodological aside, this genealogical impulse, if you apply it too crudely, risks the genetic fallacy. That's the error of thinking that the origin of a belief automatically invalidates its truth. We definitely need to consider if Nietzsche himself manages to avoid that trap. Second, this is a prime example of the hermeneutics of suspicion. Nietzsche doesn't read philosophical texts by simply taking their surface claims at face value. Oh no, he actively hunts for what might be hidden, unstated, or even self-deceptive. He's asking, what unacknowledged need or desire might this philosophical idea be serving? What is the philosopher not saying? Or, what personal stake do they have in their claims? The very idea that a conviction is what truly steps onto the stage, rather than pure, unadulterated reason, is a profoundly suspicious reading of how philosophy presents itself. This approach reframes philosophy as a kind of symptomatology, where entire systems are read as symptoms of the philosopher's underlying state. Profound. So, let's consider this. Nietzsche claims all philosophies have this hidden conviction. Take a philosopher we've studied, maybe Plato or Descartes. What do you think Nietzsche might identify as their core conviction? The one that steps onto the stage? What textual clues, or even biographical details, might back up such a genealogical reading? And how might a Straussian reading, representing one very distinct interpretive school, interpret this conviction in Plato? Perhaps as a noble lie, essential for the city, an exoteric veil cloaking an esoteric teaching. Interesting. This conviction, then, is presented as the exact point where the philosopher's subjectivity, their personal constitution, their deepest commitments, irreducibly bleeds into the supposedly impersonal domain of their thought. It's the moment the philosopher as a person is unveiled behind the grand system. And if this is true, as Nietzsche forcefully asserts, it potentially blows apart the entire traditional philosophical enterprise. At least, if that enterprise claims for itself a purely objective, universally rational basis, it shatters the old boundaries between epistemology and psychology, suggesting that the knower's very constitution is integral to what can even count as knowledge. a radical thought. Then, Nietzsche offers this startling, almost cryptic, illustration of this.
Conviction.
Brace yourselves.
Or, to use the language of an ancient mystery, adventavit asinus, pulcher and fortissimus.
The ass arrived, beautiful and very strong. Wow. Suddenly, we're yanked from the abstract idea of conviction to this vivid, concrete, and frankly, rather shocking image. And it's framed within the context of an ancient mystery. The German mysterium, drawing from the Greek mysterion, immediately conjures up ancient mystery cults. Think initiation rites, esoteric knowledge, truths grasped beyond mere words, transformative, often ritualistic experiences. This frames the philosopher's conviction, not as some dry, logical premise, but as something akin to a foundational, perhaps even sacred, and most certainly non-rational revelation. The sheer juxtaposition of styles here, moving from standard German philosophical prose to this Latin quotation that harks back to an archaic, symbolic realm, formally enacts a leap. It powerfully underscores the idea that philosophy's deepest root lies far outside its own rational self-conception. And here, we absolutely must engage with another of Nietzsche's crucial methods, offering us yet another key methodological insight for reading him effectively: metaphorical reasoning in philosophy. Philosophers don't just wield logic, they use images, they tell stories. A metaphor, like Nietzsche's ass, isn't mere decoration. Not at all. It's a vehicle for conveying a complex idea, often with tremendous emotional force, in a way that literal language just might not manage. The aphorism's concise, assertive, and somewhat enigmatic form beautifully mirrors the very nature of the conviction it describes. It performs the abrupt, foundational character of that conviction. So, to analyze it, we must ask, what does this make us think and feel? What different interpretations are possible, and what does each reveal about the philosopher's ultimate point? And very closely related is his use of classical allusion and intertextuality. Philosophers often speak to other texts, other traditions, without explicitly quoting them. Recognizing these echoes, like Nietzsche's nod to ancient mystery and his use of Latin, can unlock much deeper layers of meaning. What does that phrase, ancient mystery, evoke for you? Secrecy, perhaps. Ritual. Initiation. Non-rational experience. How does connecting the philosopher's conviction to such a realm fundamentally alter our perception of it? The ass, asinus, is a symbol absolutely dripping with multivalence, especially in antiquity. And Nietzsche, the meticulous classical philologist, would have been acutely, painfully aware of this. It can signify stubbornness, sure, ignorance, even baseness. But, and this is key, it can also symbolize humility, patience, remarkable endurance. Classical philological scholarship might trace sources for the asinus in mystery cults, perhaps to Apuleius's The Golden Ass, where Lucius is transformed into an ass and then witnesses the profound mysteries of Isis, or even to Dionysian processions, where the ass famously carried Silenus. But the crucial qualifiers here, the words that electrify the image, are pulcher et fortissimus. In classical Latin, pulcher isn't just about physical beauty. It extends to noble, fine, or glorious. And fortissimus, that's the superlative. Very strong, bravest, most powerful. This is not just any old ass, folks. This is an ass endowed with remarkable, undeniably positive attributes. And that creates a deliberate paradox, one that forces us to stop, to think, to reevaluate. This ambiguity is absolutely central. Indeed, and this represents a significant point of interpretive tension within Nietzsche's scholarship, it invites us, practically begs us, to consider a whole range of alternative interpretations of what Nietzsche means by this conviction appearing as a beautiful and very strong ass. How might different interpretive traditions grapple with this? A deconstructionist, for instance, might seize upon the asinus as an undecidable metaphor, its meaning endlessly deferred, powerfully highlighting philosophy's inability to ever truly escape figuration, even in its most intense moments of self-critique. One reading, perhaps the most immediate one, leans hard into the pejorative connotations of ass. The conviction, then, becomes a moment of intellectual failure, a point where reason just gives up, surrendering to unthinking stubbornness, to dogma, or to blind faith. The ass here would symbolize stupidity, or the base, and pulcher et fortissimus might be read with a heavy dose of irony, highlighting the brute force of the prejudice, how incredibly strongly the philosopher is bound by it, rather than any genuine virtue. From this viewpoint, philosophers are largely self-deceived, and Nietzsche is brilliantly exposing a fundamental flaw that undermines much of philosophy. Psychologically, if we put on our Freudian hats for a moment, one might see this ass as representing the repressed id, its primal instinctual energies, powerfully dictating intellectual positions. A kind of return of the repressed in philosophical drag. The beautiful and strong could then be the ego's desperate attempt to sublimate or rationalize this raw, untamed energy. However, that explicit beautiful and very strong really pushes back against a purely negative reading, doesn't it? And this leads us to a second interpretation, the conviction as a necessary, perhaps even vital foundation. It's an unavoidable starting point, a fundamental commitment or value orientation that makes any coherent worldview even possible. Here, the ass, as pulcher et fortissimus, suggests something robust, something enduring, and perhaps something genuinely admirable in its unshakable, instinctual nature. This resonates quite powerfully with themes in existentialist thought. Think of Kierkegaard's leap of faith, for instance, where foundational commitments are understood to be fundamentally beyond rational proof, yet absolutely essential for a meaningful existence. The strength and beauty of the conviction could reflect the profound authenticity that comes from such a deeply held, unwavering stance. From a Lacanian viewpoint, this asinus might even function as a synthome, that unanalyzable kernel of jouissance that structures the philosopher's entire intellectual edifice. Fascinating. A third interpretation, closely related to the second, but perhaps more specifically, quintessentially Nietzschean, views the conviction as a Dionysian affirmation. Yes, the ass, in some ancient Dionysian contexts, symbolized fertility, primal energy, or a deep connection to the chthonic. The earthy pulcher et fortissimus would then be genuine, heartfelt praise for this vital, non-rational foundation that erupts powerfully into the philosophical arena. This aligns beautifully with Nietzsche's broader critique of Socratic rationalism, his radical revaluation of instinct, and his passionate call for an affirmation of life in its glorious, messy totality. The ancient mystery itself points towards pre-Socratic, perhaps Dionysian, religious contexts, where such primal energies were not just acknowledged, but celebrated. Carl Jung, in his extensive, deep engagement with Nietzsche, particularly in his Zarathustra seminars, might interpret this adventavit asinus pulcher et fortissimus as the dramatic eruption of the vital, instinctual shadow aspect of the philosopher's psyche, and its description as beautiful and strong. That would then signify a positive integration of this instinctual power, providing the true, authentic foundation for a genuinely life-affirming philosophy. This reading has been incredibly influential, especially in post-Deleuzian interpretations that really emphasize the affirmative, creative forces pulsating through Nietzsche's work. So, we have this progression. Every philosophy, Nietzsche says, rests on a conviction. And this conviction, it's like the dramatic arrival of a beautiful and very strong ass within an ancient mystery. The argument, then, is clearly not a formal deduction. Not at all. It's an assertive thesis, brilliantly illustrated by a powerful, multivariant analogy. Its strength lies in its profound psychological acuity, what Nietzsche himself might call his indigenous psychology of embodied perspectives and the will to power as interpretation, and its unforgettable, deliberately provocative framing. A framing which forces a total re-examination of philosophy's often arrogant claims to pure rationality. Its potential weakness, if you take it too simplistically, could be a charge of genetic fallacy, just dismissing philosophies merely because their origins are non-rational. But Nietzsche's aim, I think, seems far more complex. To unmask, yes. To provoke, absolutely. And to revalue, not simply to dismiss. He challenges philosophy's decorum, its prim and properness, forcing it to engage with the lowly or the primal, to truly understand itself. A powerful move. Let's pause here. We've unpacked the two main parts of this incredibly rich aphorism. So, how does this metaphor of the beautiful and strong ass change your understanding of Nietzsche's initial claim about the philosopher's conviction? Does it make it more damning, more nuanced, or perhaps even affirmative in some unexpected sense? Furthermore, considering Nietzsche's claim that every philosophy has such a foundation, how does this aphorism itself perform its own thesis? Is Nietzsche's own assertion about convictions itself a beautiful and strong ass, stepping onto the stage of his philosophy? Think about that. Throughout this aphorism, several absolutely key concepts are being forged. Conviction, Überzeugung, is introduced as this foundational, non-rationally derived belief, a potent generalization of those specific prejudices we've encountered earlier. The philosopher's subjectivity is thrust right into the foreground, decisively challenging that old ideal of the disinterested, purely objective thinker. Nietzsche's own distinctive method of using metaphor and symbolism is on full, glorious display, with the asinus carrying an immense interpretive weight, and the reference to the non-rational in philosophy, brought in via the ancient mystery, connects these foundational convictions to realms far beyond logical deduction, perhaps to instinct, to religious experience, or to deep cultural inheritances, powerfully echoing Nietzsche's profound interest in pre-Socratic modes of thought. And what's the result? Well, this transforms our understanding of philosophy itself. It's less a disinterested pursuit of objective truth, and much more an expression of fundamental perspectives, with the philosopher emerging as a kind of cultural diagnostician, a radical shift. Now, when we encounter potentially problematic content like this ass metaphor, which, let's be honest, can easily be misconstrued as merely pejorative or anti-intellectual, and it's worth noting, just as a brief historiographical aside, that some early 20th century interpretations did indeed lean heavily that way. However, our task as scholars, as critical thinkers, is to engage responsibly. This means, first, acknowledging the shock value. Absolutely. But then we must thoroughly explore the full range of symbolic meanings, especially within the classical and mystery traditions that Nietzsche knew like the back of his hand. This is a task that was taken up by later scholars like Walter Kaufmann, and then further deepened by post-structuralist thinkers, and those who emphasize Nietzsche's vital philological roots. We must emphasize the crucial role of culture at fortissimus. It is not just any ass, but one explicitly described with notable positive attributes. And we absolutely must connect our interpretation to Nietzsche's broader philosophical project, his scathing critique of a sterile, disembodied rationalism, and his tireless search for a philosophy that affirms life in its absolute fullness, including its more earthy, instinctual aspects. This careful engagement, frankly, really underscores the genuine interpretive challenges Nietzsche so often throws our way, and it highlights the collective, ongoing nature of scholarship in unraveling his profound complexities. In essence, Nietzsche is performing a kind of psychoanalysis of philosophy itself. He's suggesting that its deepest truths, its foundational convictions, might actually emerge from the unconscious, from powerful instinctual drives, the ass in its primal strength, which, if acknowledged and skillfully integrated, becomes beautiful and strong. This text-reader dynamic is entirely intentional. The aphorism is engineered to provoke, to disturb our complacency about what philosophy is or should be, and to incite deep self-reflection about our own foundational commitments. What are they? To synthesize all this, Aphorism 8 argues that all philosophy, despite its grand pretensions to pure rationality, is ultimately grounded in a personal, non-rational conviction. Now, this conviction isn't necessarily a flaw to be expunged. Oh no, it might be a fundamental, perhaps even a vital, starting point. And it's characterized by that powerful, wonderfully ambiguous image of a beautiful and very strong ass, arriving dramatically within the context of an ancient mystery. The methods Nietzsche employs here, genealogy, hermeneutics of suspicion, metaphorical reasoning, and classical allusion, are absolutely integral to understanding his critique and its far-reaching implications. He forces us to ask not only what philosophers argue, but why they are driven to argue it, and from what deep personal wellspring their ideas truly flow. This has profound metaphilosophical implications, doesn't it? It suggests a desperate need for greater honesty in philosophy about its own foundations. And it's truly fascinating to see how this Nietzschean insight echoes in contemporary discussions, for instance, in cognitive science regarding motivated reasoning, or in the philosophy of science debates about the undeniable role of values in any inquiry. Still relevant. Still relevant. So, as we move on to Aphorism 9, what can we anticipate? Well, Nietzsche will continue this relentless unmasking process. Having so provocatively characterized the foundational conviction of philosophers, he will begin to explore the types of individuals who become philosophers, or perhaps the deep psychological needs these convictions ultimately serve. The plot thickens. For next time, I really want you to chew on this. If Nietzsche is right, and every philosophy is indeed founded on such a conviction, what does this imply for our own engagement with philosophical texts? And, perhaps more importantly, for our own philosophical endeavors? How do we critically assess, or even choose, our own foundational asses, so to speak? And here's a further question for reflection. How does Nietzsche's critique here potentially reconfigure the relationship between traditionally distinct philosophical subdisciplines, such as metaphysics and ethics, or epistemology and the psychology of the philosopher? Big questions. See you then.